piece of advice you've received that initially seemed strange but turned out to be remarkably insightful? Story 1. This is not mine but something I read somewhere. But essentially, a girl was practicing archery and kept messing up, and the instructor told her, "You're failing because you're too focused on the target and not your own actions." She proceeded to say that it was the best life advice she had ever gotten. Story 2. Everyone is either going through a storm, coming out of the storm, or preparing to enter a storm. That is the cycle of life until you die. 15-year-old me Nana. That is such a negative point of view. 30s me. Holy Nana was right. When you move, the first thing you set up is your bedroom. When everything is chaos and you're exhausted from moving boxes all day, you have a place to crash that is ready for you. Story 3. Some people need to be excluded from social plans even if it makes you feel like a bad person. For context, a person in our friend group always killed the vibe and had tantrums, and finally my friend gave me this advice. She said I was so lovey and caring and inclusive, but that advice. Story 4. We as humans tend to pick up the habits of the people we hang out with, so surround yourself with people whose habits you actually want to emulate. Edit. All this means is, for example, if you're trying to quit smoking, avoid hanging out with heavy smokers. Or if you're trying to be more active, find friends who love the gym. Story 5. My first boss told me, just before firing me, "You know how to work efficiently, but you don't know how to look like you are working efficiently." Later in life hit me, people will look for perceived value even more than the real one you give. So my advice in work environments is look like you are busy. If you finish thing on date, doesn't matter if you needed 2 days and spent 3 on Reddit, like I am just now LOL, or you spent the entire week deep into it. Look busy. Story 6. If someone is trying to intimidate you, stare at them confidently and say nothing. They will back off. I thought it was the dumbest thing I ever heard. Ended up trying it on the bully at work, and she freaked out and avoided me for the next few years we worked together. I use it all the time on people now, LMAO. Story 7. My ex-wife once told me, buy perfume from a company that makes perfume. Meaning, clothing companies, actors, etc. might have a perfume brand, but buy perfume from a company for whom that is their primary focus. This advice generalizes nicely to nearly all purchases. Story 8. When I was working as a cashier at a grocery store back in high school, an elderly man I was serving leaned in and whispered to me, "Never take sleeping pills and laxatives at the same time. Trust me on this." I don't know why he told me this, but I have lived by that advice ever since. Story 9. Run your own race. Bluey. Yeah, I know. Total dad answer. I work with students, and so many are comparing themselves to others and listening to misleading advice. I frequently need to remind them they are the only one on their path. Story 10. The chef I worked for let 18-yo, homeless me, stay in a room above his garage through the winter. The rental agreement was, just mow the lawn once a week and don't be in. I love that till this day. There's no reason to be in nearly any situation, so don't be one. Story 11. Best hiring advice I ever got. I can teach anyone a skill. I can teach them an attitude. It actually doesn't matter that much what a candidate knows or is familiar with, if they're willing and able to learn and can get along. If they can't get along, then it doesn't matter what they know or can do. Story 12. I've got 2. It's possible to do your best and still fail. Kinda depressing one, but it helps not to focus on negative things. Life is unfair and sometimes you just can't succeed. None of us is as dumb as all of us. This is my favorite. You can describe any community using this phrase. Your company, your favorite show's fandom, even your country. Herd mentality is A. Story 13. When I had my learner's permit to drive, my dad always said drive like you and everyone else has a baby in the car. It was weird to me at the time because I was 15, but made me a pretty cautious driver because who would want to be responsible for a motor vehicle accident that harms a baby? But the words hit home now because I have a toddler and a baby now. Story 14. This isn't exactly advice, but my dad used to talk to me and send me stuff about all these cool technological breakthroughs. I can remember things like smart roads, and CRISPR, and new solar panel efficiency. And we would talk about the new fusion breakthroughs and just cutting-edge stuff that I like to read about. So, my dad died about 6 months ago. Suddenly and awful, and me and my siblings were talking, and we realized he did the same thing to them, but more suited to their interests. My sister was all medical stuff, and my brother was all sports. We didn't realize until after he was gone that my dad used to research and read about his children's interests, so he would have stuff to talk about with us. And it kinda wrecked me. My dad was always great, but we never realized just how great he was. So I guess the advice was, get to know your kids, share in their interests. Story 15. Before I got married, my stepdad advised me to really think it through. My fiancé family was super racist. They were strongly against us being together, and the consequences of them finding out we were dating Caused a lot of conflict and pain for my fiance. My stepdad told me when you marry someone, you usually gain a new family. But if you marry him, you won't have that. Lose his family and be alone, and you'll just have us, my family of origin. Think about if he's worth it. I dismissed it at the time because we were so in love. It was us against the world, you know? Now many years have passed and my stepdad was right. It's not something that impacts us daily and we don't regret our relationship. But there are things other people get to have that we don't. Holidays, childcare support, just having a second set of family members in our lives is something we don't get. And as my righteous anger has faded, it just makes me tired now. Comparison is the thief of joy, and likewise, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Stop looking to others to set the rules for your own life and for what happy or successful means. And don't obsess or focus too much on small details when it's the bigger picture that you frame to make a life and what makes work. Story 16. To be honest, I think everyone gets told at least once in their life to just be yourself. And almost every teenager will do anything to fit in, which usually results in doing the exact opposite. It's only later in life when most people realize that being yourself will indeed make you the happiest. Story 17. A lot of people don't understand how much work it takes to live a respectable life and to be of no burden to anyone. A random Redditor regarding people who are constantly expecting handouts or hand-holding through every crisis they put themselves into, believing that we are simply privileged to have what we have, ignoring the hard work we've put into having anything at all. It's stuck with me for a long time due to its accuracy. Edit to add clarification. I'm talking about people who make the same bad choices over and over and over again, doing nothing to change their own circumstances, expecting you to simply hold their life together for them while simultaneously resenting you for having what they consider to be more than them, and completely disregarding the amount of work you have to put in to have what you do. I'm not talking about people who genuinely need help sometimes. Story 18. Sometimes love isn't enough. This was a really hard one to learn, especially when you love someone so much. But sometimes that isn't enough to help them or save them from themselves. They have to love themselves enough to want to change, and you can't force that no matter how much love you give them. Story 19. From my dad paraphrasing, son, you're not good looking, and you're no genius. You can either learn to make women laugh or die a virgin. Cue 50 years of jokes. He was an EO, but he was right about this. I'm not handsome, and no smarter than most, but I've never lacked female companionship. I believe that one of the reasons my current relationship works so well is that I can still make her laugh. Edit to add, if you can make her laugh, her panties are halfway off already. Story 20. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for bullies, meaning just because something worked against one bully doesn't mean it will work against another. Most people will advise you to either ignore the bully or face the bully, and then tell you how they or someone they know solved their bully problem. Carefully think before applying their solution because it may not lead to the same outcome. Story 21. If you keep running into the same problem everywhere you go, you're the problem. Figure out the things that you need to work on personally and change. Story 22. Family will always be the first to you over. Dad, 1982. He was right. Don't do business deal with family, or land deals, or anything that involves money or potential jail time. They think there is an automatic forgiveness switch built into the family genetic code. Story 23. Let them be the ones to tell you no. So often we don't go after we want because we tell ourselves no on others' behalf. It's important to learn to put yourself out there, and if you don't get what you want, you aren't the one who withheld it from yourself. Story 24. When I was training to be a machinist, my instructor told me to use a calculator. He immediately followed it with, I am not your math teacher, and neither is your employer. Your math teacher wanted you to do it by hand, to prove that you understood what you were doing and what steps it took to get there. Your employer cares about it getting done quickly and accurately, and that means using a calculator. It was a good lesson about motivation and expectation when it's tempting to think of a binary right-wrong. Story 25. My cousins told me that before making any major decisions I need to masturbate. Want to buy that car? It. Deciding on which school to go to? It. Don't know if you want to date a person? Spank it. Want to call your ex and get back together? Crank it. Honestly, it's kept me from making stupid decisions so many times. Being angry and resentful is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's some pretty sound life advice. Story 26. Learn to listen. This means that as a young guy, I should listen more than speak, and only speak when I know it will contribute something and never overshare. Story 27. My mom and some senior relatives told me that your coworkers are not your friends when I first started working. I got along for all my old coworkers very well and hang out. This advice was strange to me in the beginning, but now I totally understand why they said that. Story 28. Chase rejection. Try to get rejected as much as possible. It's a good tip for PPL with social anxiety and perfectionists who are too afraid to do anything because they're afraid of getting rejected. There's a girl on Instagram who applied to Harvard as a joke and got waitlisted. That story is engraved in my brain for to have the audacity to ask for insane things that you'd never in a million years think you'd get. Go get rejected. Story 29. My nan always said don't trust someone who doesn't like cats. It means they don't like things they have no control of. She of course didn't mean those with allergies, etc. I never took it seriously until I was older and looked back on ex-BFs and friends. One friend hated cats. Eventually blinded one with a BB gun, which is when I unfriended him. He beat his GF to near death in his late teens. My ex-husband hated cats. After we got married, he turned violent. Another ex hated cats. Turned out to be a psycho and stalker. Don't get me wrong, I know plenty of cat lovers can be psychos, but she certainly had a point. Story 30. Kind of specific one, but it's that when you go to college, university, and will be sharing a kitchen with other students, make sure you have your own designated dish towel that only you use. I didn't get why this was a thing until I went. When you're in a shared student house or dorm halls, nobody takes responsibility for communal things. Dish towels being used by everyone means they basically never get washed as nobody wants to take the responsibility. They become vile and disgusting. Having your own you hideaway is good, as it means you have one that isn't gross, and don't have to be the one to always wash all the dish towels, as over time it's annoying as you use up a lot of your own laundry soap. Story 31. Take life slowly. There is no need to rush anything. At the end, we all go to the same place, so why rush it? Advice from an old man randomly in one of the freezer aisles at the grocery store. That hit me hard when I got home. I had just gotten kicked out of my house and was with a few roommates and felt left behind on everything due to their lifestyles. Best advice ever. Story 32. Two things won from childhood. Dr. Seuss people who mind don't matter, and people who matter don't mind. Two from my grandfather. Marriage is never giving up at the same time. Story 33. Embrace failure. Failure is often viewed negatively, but it is a crucial part of learning and growth. Instead of fearing failure, see it as an opportunity to learn, adapt, and thrive. Story 34. You talk a lot, not a bad thing, but just be aware of it. The best boss I ever had, a bit off her rocker, gave the weirdest pieces of advice, but here's this thing. No one else would have told me that. Someone who honestly and openly told me how I was perceived by others was so incredibly helpful. Story 35. A piece of advice I received that initially seemed strange was, don't rush to agree, but don't rush to disagree either. At first glance, this advice may seem confusing or even contradictory. However, over time, I realized that it is an invitation to be open, to truly listen, and to critically evaluate information before forming an opinion. In a world where we are often encouraged to have quick answers and align with a certain perspective, this advice reminds us that it's okay to take our time to process information and form our own conclusions. This not only helps us avoid judgment errors, but also allows us to develop our critical thinking skills and become better at understanding and navigating the complexity of the surrounding world. This advice, although strange at first, turned out to be remarkably insightful and valuable to me. Story 36. When I was in high school, I once heard someone say there's no such thing as marital problems. What? Then he expounded. There's only single people problems brought into a marriage, and it makes a lot of sense. Marital problems pretty much always stem from unresolved issues in one or both parties. Story 37. Define your own success and decide what promotion you are willing to sacrifice for. Came from a mentor in the military. He told me about a former boss of his who was a 3-star general, and when he didn't get selected for a 4th, he had a complete breakdown. He had achieved success by any reasonable measure. General officers are already in the less than 1 category, and he had gotten to the AO1 range. Yet he never saw himself as successful because someone else had more. BTW, this is exactly what happened to General Flynn, and it triggered his journey off the deep end. I got to see that happen real time as I was part of DIA when it went down. It took me a few years for that advice to really sink in. I saw some of my peers chasing promotions for no good reason at the expense of everything else in their lives. Some became so focused on it, they did some very unethical things which, in a twist of irony, caused them to not get the promotion they craved. All because they couldn't see that they had already achieved a level of success they once would have been over the moon about. The second part was more critical. He went on to explain that choosing that point doesn't mean you give up. It means you stop sacrificing. If you don't choose when to stop sacrificing, you will never stop. I saw that all the time. A former chief of staff of the Army told one group, "We are all future non-selects, as in, not selected for promotion. Don't get to your non-select day and find out your friends and family non-selected you a long time ago." This was said to a group of high achievers who had all just been selected for a big deal promotion. It was a hard reality check, and I will tell you less than half in the room heard it. You see a lot of this in the influencer culture now. All the fake lifestyle people who rent planes, sitting on the ground for a photo shoot so they can pretend they are flying to Ibiza, or sitting in supercars at a dealership and photoshopping in backgrounds to make it look like that are in Dubai. Young people see this and think they are falling behind when in fact they are likely far better off than these fakers. One of my subordinates was basically complaining to me that she couldn't afford to live in our area by comparing her apartment to my house. I'm almost 30 years older than her. It took me most of those 30 years of slog to get to the point where I could afford that house. When I was her age, I couldn't afford her apartment. She makes over 10K a month and thinks she is failing. What? At the same time, she talks about how hard it is to maintain relationships because of hustling. Everyone is sacrificing everything for nothing but more hustle. Define what success means to you and stick to it. Decide what you are willing to sacrifice for and stick to it. Story 38. Weirdly enough, it's a quote from Adventure Time. Sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something. Jake. It's not the first time I heard a quote like about not letting failure stop you in your tracks, but it is the version that has stuck in my head. Definitely the type of advice that helped younger me get over the fear of failure. Story 39. When you take a YOLC, focus on shutting, said my doctor after me having a hemorrhoidectomy on my wedding day 40 years ago. My father-in-law pulled me aside and said, "I have a piece of advice for you, always carry a book." Confused, I smiled and thanked him. Fast forward a year. My wife and I are visiting my in-laws. We have dinner reservations for 7 p.m. My father-in-law and I are ready to leave. Our wives are still getting dressed. My father-in-law announces to the ladies, both of whom are always chronically late, that he and I are going to wait for them on the front porch. We go outside and talk about this and that. It is getting late, and I start to worry about our dinner reservation, at which point my father-in-law confesses that our reservation is for 8 p.m. We talk a few minutes more, then fall into silence. My father-in-law reaches into his back pocket and produces a book, then turns to me and says, "Where's your book?" Story 40. Posted this on another chat similar to this a while back. Don't stick your finger in something you wouldn't stick your in. Saved me many a hurt finger. Story 41. Forgive the people that wronged you. Always thought this was a good way to get taken advantage of. But when you grow up, you realize forgiveness is for you, not for them, for your own peace of mind. Story 42. As someone with ADHD, the biggest, oddest piece of advice that has helped me is, if you're hungry and you lose something, check the fridge. So many times I've found my wallet or my keys, and once even a book I was reading, in the fridge. Story 43. Make your bed first thing in the morning every morning. It is amazing for your mental well-being and enhances your emotional state, providing a sense of peace, order, control, and self-discipline. And it works. Story 44. My dad, if you want something bad enough to steal it, come to me first. We will find a way to get it for you. I have always been too scared to steal after that. Story 45. I've got a couple that I use often. 1. You can't reason a person out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. This distinction is important if you want any hope of driving towards consensus in differing opinions actions. And 2. You can't change what people do, but you can change what they know. Helping people understand what consequences, rewards, will come from choices they make about their behavior, and sticking to them when you're the one in control of said outcome is important to have confidence and a clear conscience when dealing with others. Story 46. If you have to justify it, that means you did something wrong. One of the first bosses I had in my adult life told me this after I made up excuse after excuse, trying to justify why I did something. It has stuck with me, and I say it to my kids now. Story 47. When you're having an inner dialogue with yourself, say that you're saying mentally out loud. It really made me take a step back and examine my mental health and how I treat myself. I felt schizo for the first few weeks of me doing it, but it eventually became normal. Story 48. Don't you dare look back with regret. You made the best decision you could with the information you had at the time. It took a while for this to really sink in. Story 49. Don't worry about fitting in. People might think you're weird now, but you are becoming interesting. Got this advice as a teenager, and it turned out to be B100 true. When I was supposed to be into drinking and partying and going out, I was making websites and drawing people and writing AI chatbots and creating Duke Nukem 3D maps of my school. Now 20 years later, and I have an interesting career, am surrounded by interesting people, and have a bunch of different hobbies. Meanwhile, most of the people who were focused on fitting in are the most boring and average people on Earth. You can see it if you're on a dating app. It's a sea of boring people who are all the exact same, and then every now and then there's a real person who lived. Someone who could talk your ear off about something you don't know, who invested the time when they were young to become interesting. Story 50. A few months ago, my wife told me she was leaving me. I was completely devastated. The best advice I received was to 100 give up on keeping her and focus on improving myself instead. I didn't accept it at first. It wasn't until my wife lawyered up and I felt absolute hopelessness at repairing the situation that I embraced this. I had already been working on my personal problems that led to marriage issues. But when I completely abandoned hope of holding on to my wife and focused on being the best version of myself, the best dad I could be, and working with my wife on moving on plans that would be best for our kids, that's when she changed her tone. Right when our lawyers were about to get their hands really dirty in sorting things out, my wife told me she wanted to try again and go to couples counseling. We're not out of the woods by any stretch, but my wife's attitude has changed from, "We have no hope of any future together. Please stop trying to giving me a hug every day," and "We're screening couples counselors together." Story 51. I was GM HR with a manufacturing company few years back. We were having a huge retention rate in the industry. Even though we were having a good hold in the market, we were not able to find why people were leaving the company, and we were spending a lot of money on hiring and training new employees. It was an alarming situation for me since we were not able to find the cause. Back in time, I had a teacher in the university who gave us this example during one of his lecture about if there is an alarming rate of employees leaving the company, there are one or two supervisors who could be responsible for that situation. Since it was so particular example about the supervisor could be responsible, and there was no reference quoted, I thought at that time that the information the teacher was giving may not work, and it was just his opinion. I decided to try the teacher's theory, and I started my own investigation. The process was too long since I was having around 56 production units, with 56 managers, 100 or so supervisors, and around 9,600 employees. After a few months, I found out few names. There was a small group among senior employees which was responsible for on-job bullying, and which was operated by two of the supervisors who were most senior employees of the company. No one was going against them or filed a complaint against them because everyone knows them, even my boss knew them so well. I decided to address this, so I transferred both supervisors to the units which were located in other cities. I gave them reasons that the management was thinking about expanding the business in those cities. And since they were so productive, management decided to give them more responsibilities. They agreed to that. After this, I have started firing people who were bullying and threatening other employees. This sent a clear message to all the supervisors, even those two supervisors whom I transferred to remote locations. After a few months due to poor performance and few complaints against them, I fired them, and then after I was having almost zero retention rate. My boss was happy with that since we saved a lot of for the company. My teacher's advice worked for me, which I thought it was not useful. Story 52. Hesitation is the seed of defeat. Akali. This is so true for any physical feat. Like plan and rehearse your jump ahead of time, but when it comes to executing it, you gotta commit fully. Works on other domains too. Giving a conference talk, flirting, learning something new. Once you decide to do what you want to do, just do it. This is a piece of advice from a video game character, yeah. Who knew League of Legends could be so insightful? That game also taught me how to be absolute zen when everyone around you up for the stupidest reasons. I don't have a quote for that, just a lesson gained from experienced necessity after playing that for a while. Story 53. This was said to a colleague working in the same lab as us, and both the professor and his wife were MD PhD from China. She was going to give her 12-way report for her doctorate. Be like communist China, and only say the good things. If you do not know the answer, say we will look into it, but we need more funding. Story 54. Something my dad told me that stuck. I was in a stage where everything seemed to go wrong all at once. Lost job, lost girlfriend, barely making enough to eat, flunking out of college, etc. Dad told me to laugh. What? Son, life is a theater of the absurd. If you can't laugh at all of it and not just some of it, you'll never make it. Story 55. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. Basically means you're going to lose more time rushing and inevitably having to fix a screw-up than you would just taking your time, following your training and muscle memory, and getting the job right the first time through. I think it's originally military. I can tell you it works in brewing even if it's easier said than done when the crunch is on, and you can feel the minutes slipping away. And it probably works everywhere. Story 56. If there's a fight at a party but it's broken up and the losers of the fight are kicked out or leave, then you should leave too even if you weren't involved. 9 times out of 10 they will come back either with backup, weapons, or both. This has happened so many times when I used to go to house parties in my youth. Are those still a thing nowadays? I thought it was silly coming from an old street fighter, but his view was validated when I followed that advice once, and learned later on that a guy at the party I was at, who got his kicked by some roided-up MMA wannabe, came back and shot up the place. Story 57. To connect with people. At first, I thought it meant being extroverted and not very useful, but once I started talking to people, it improved my personality so much. I became more confident in myself and realized one amazing fact about life. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know. Story 58. If you only do the parts but never the whole, you won't get anywhere. If you only do the whole and never the parts, you'll fail every time. My swim coach said that to me while I was struggling to draw during downtime at championships. I was very confused until I realized she had said that hundreds of times with practice when someone complained about the sets. Didn't realize it works across the board. Story 59. You get what you settle for. When I heard that originally, it sounded so pretentious. But as I've gotten older, it's true in all sorts of arenas. Dating, personal interactions, job salary negotiations, your situation in life, etc. I also realized you can do it without being pretentious. Story 60 then. Entirety of Outfit by the Drive-By Truckers. I always thought the lyrics were clever when I was younger, but the older I get, the more the advice lyrics hit home. So don't let 'em take who you are, boy, and don't try to be who you ain't. And don't let me catch you in Kendale with a bucket of wealthy man's paint. Story 61. When my wife was pregnant with our first child and soon to deliver, I went to lunch with a friend who already had 2 young kids, and he gave me a few great pieces of advice. There's going to be a lot of people in your life with strong views on how you should raise your children. They will share those views with you, and some of them you will vehemently disagree with. It costs you nothing to just say, "Thanks, I'll really keep that in mind," and move on, completely ignoring whatever they said. And then instead of anger and fighting, you get peace. When your wife is delivering, remember that every single person and every single thing in that room, including the coat rack, is serving a better purpose there than you. Your job is to do whatever your wife wants in the moment, without complaint or delay, and outside of that to be quiet and comforting and stay out of everyone's way. On the day you take your wife to give birth, don't wear your good shoes. All advice that served me well. Story 62. I was playing a game of golf with my dad, and a guy playing by himself played the first hole with his and went on ahead of us. I was swinging and whiffing, and he shouts from across the fairway, "Stop trying to hit it so hard." Instantly improved game and great life advice. Not everything needs to be a huge drive. It's okay to incrementally get where you need to go. Story 63. A college professor, when I told him I was going to have a kid, told me the best parenting advice he ever heard was, "It will wash off." Turned out to be so true on many levels. Story 64. If you become overwhelmed with your newborn and feel like you're going to break, just walk away for a few minutes. Your baby will be fine, and you won't do anything you may regret. Sounds messed up, but every new mom gets frustrated. When my mom told me that, I was taken back, thinking that I would never get that frustrated, but there were a few times where I felt like that was good advice. Story 65. Nothing about you is special. That seems harsh, but it's helped me so much. I went through the worst breakup of my life, but realizing that nothing about it was special helped me. Ours wasn't the greatest romance ever known. We weren't too deeply in love that no one has ever known love like it, no matter how much I wanted that to be the case. Realistically, this situation had happened thousands, maybe millions of times. She cheated. I caught her. I left. I felt lonely. That's the end of it, and realizing that I'd make it just a millions of others had before me and will after me helped me realize that no, I'm not special, which means I can make it just like the rest if mankind has. Heartbreak isn't unique. Story 66. Honey, just promise me you will always be grateful for every day you can wipe your own. My great-uncle Jack, aged 90, to my mom, who he raised like a dad, about a week before he died. I was later in a lot of horrible accidents, long ICU stays, 2 complicated births, tough times. Sometimes I lost the ability to, as he said, wipe my own. Gotta say, dude was right. Every day you can wipe your own is in fact a good day, even a very bad day. If you can use the bathroom, brush your own hair, you are in fact doing all right. This perspective is very useful when my life goes to absolute. It's even useful when I lost the ability to use the bathroom solo, gave me something simple to fight for, and celebrate when I got it back. Story 67. Not an advice, but something I read somewhere was, if you wouldn't take advice from them, why would you take criticism? And it isn't strange, but I also know some people need to hear this. Story 68. You can treat a man who gets angry too much exactly like a woman who cries too much, and eventually the people around you will realize that they're the same thing. That big loud at work? Just start referring to him as emotional behind his back, or even in front of his back. They hate that, and they don't know where to go when you're already not letting their emotions have power. Story 69. My dad once told me that if a man ever hit me to break up with immediately, he said, don't accept any apologies, don't listen to any excuses, don't give a second chance, and don't let him blame alcohol. Alcohol doesn't make anyone do anything, it just brings out what's already there. Once it starts, It only gets worse. Experience, both mine and others, bore that out. It's not just a bad day or he's under stress. He didn't really mean it, or it's really your fault. It's a sign of an abusive nature. I'd add verbal explosions to that too. Someone who gets into a screaming rage at the drop of a hat for no reason, or someone who constantly makes joking comments putting you down, is someone to be avoided, whether male or female. And don't fall into the trap of thinking that if I were prettier, smarter, nicer, more understanding, etc., it wouldn't have happened. Story 70. I was considering going to university and do the degree I wanted to when I was younger, but had to leave school and work instead when I was in my mid-30s, but realized I would be 43 before I finished the degree due to having to do it part-time and work, and told a friend it probably wasn't worth the effort. My mate said, "You're going to be 43 at some point anyway. Might as well be 43 with the degree." It made sense, and I enrolled. Only one more year to go, and then I can think about the possibility of a master's. It will mean I can't even possibly work in that field until I'm 50. But hey, I'll be 50 at some point anyway. May as well be doing what I've always wanted to.